So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. We will be doing these 3 times a week for the time being, every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. This Saturday's event is not yet on, been posted yet on the London Ayn Rand meetup page, but it will be soon, and it will be Saturday at 7 p.m. UK time. So that event will be with Josh Dixon. It will be about psychology. We will have an event on psychology every Saturday, starting this Saturday. And for Monday's event, I will update you as well. For today, we will be discussing the economic implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have, as always, we have Nikos, and we also have Jonathan Hoenig. He is a founding member of the Capitalist Pig hedge fund. He's a frequent contributor on Fox Business in the US, and he is the editor of a new textbook of Americanism, The Politics of Ayn Rand. Some of you, I think quite a few of you were here at some of our events that we did with Jonathan last year, and we will be doing events with Jonathan once again, hopefully even this year, once people are allowed to congregate. So I will let Jonathan say his opening remarks. So Jonathan.
Thanks, Razi. I'm happy to be with you and appreciate everyone turning out. It's been obviously for me in the financial markets, certainly a crazy couple of weeks, really unlike what I've ever seen before, but I know in all of our contexts, it's really been like that. I mean, this is something that it's really, we're experiencing all in real time. I'll preface that even more by saying anything I say in the financial realm today, Razi, is no recommendations or endorsements of any type of individual securities. But as you said, I am a money manager, and it's been a really unprecedented, unfathomable number of weeks. One thing I keep here kind of batted around, I'll say here at the outset, is this notion of no fault of their own. We're hearing a lot about people who are out of a job, no fault of their own, no fault of their own. And, the virus obviously is no one's fault. We are all experiencing this, as I said, in real time. And this is life. It kind of happens in real time. And I think why it's so important, Razi, all the work that you do and the Ayn Rand Center does in terms of encouraging people to think, to prepare, to think long-term is so important. And this is terrible. It's unprecedented in our lifetime. But Nikos was asking me in the kind of the pre-party if I'm an optimist or I'm a pessimist, I suppose. And even given this cataclysm in just so many ways, human life, but also in the economy as well, I am an optimist. I believe in man. I believe in our capacity to think. I don't think that this is God striking us down or nature striking us down. I don't think it's set to wipe us out. I think that this is a challenge. There's been a lot of allusions made to the Spanish flu and et cetera, and all these other kind of pandemics over history. And thank God we live now when we do, because the technology is so much more advanced. And, it's a challenge to deal with the economy. But I think, and I say this in a rationally selfish way, maybe perhaps even to capitalize upon. There's opportunity, I think, here to certainly improve our lives and even improve the world. You asked to talk about some of the economic implications, and I thought maybe if I could just quickly set the scene, because 8 weeks ago the economy obviously was almost unrecognizable to what it is today. There's never a good time, I think, for a market crisis or a pandemic, certainly, but this crisis for the economy, I think, the market was in effect, I think, ripe for this. There was a lot of confidence in the economy, the U.S. economy, and forgive me, I can't speak exactly for what kind of the world and the mood is like. I know we have viewers from all over the world in UK, but in the U.S. there was great confidence coming to this. We were at 11 years into a bull market. Unemployment was at truly record lows. A lot of those indicators were, very, very strong. They're very sky high. But at the same time, there had been some worrisome signs. What they call, not to get too much in the woods, but they call the inverted yield curve had been flashing a warning sign for quite some time. and you had started to see some legitimate signs, in my opinion, of a speculative bubble. Tesla, stock went from 200 to 900 in 2 months, or even the whole crypto phenomena. So you had a market that was very kind of priced for perfection. And one of the best evidence is what they call credit spreads. Basically, the risk that you would have to assume to buy a corporate bond versus a treasury was very small, meaning there was not a lot of fear in the marketplace. And one of the things, and look, I'm a trader first and foremost, Razi, I'm not an economist, but I do believe that these ultra low interest rates that the Federal Reserve has enacted from 2000, but specifically since 2008, also set us up for a lot of the carnage that we've seen in markets in the last couple of weeks. In effect, it fakes reality, or it tries to for as long as it can. And it incentivizes things like borrowing money for stock buybacks, malinvestment, living beyond your means, living paycheck to paycheck, living on a credit card, etc. So coming into this, you had great optimism. And I'll say briefly, markets have been hurt, okay, and we need government to bail out markets. That's the kind of thought. We need the Fed to bail out markets. Whenever I'm hearing that these days, I'm frustrated, because what I hope to kind of convey, and I won't talk for too long, but what I hope to kind of convey is that the whole point of markets, the only thing that makes them useful is that they reflect reality. And to the extent that government gets involved with manipulating markets, that's my world, as I said, but in effect manipulating the economy, it makes those markets completely useless. It makes them less reliable. And you know that it's not real. And every intervention into the market, every intervention blows up eventually, whether it's the ethanol subsidies or even something like the taxi cab medallions. Investing in a taxi cab medallion used to be a great deal because it was a market monopolized by government up until who came along? Uber came along. And the value of those taxi cab medallions fell from hundreds of thousands to even just tens of thousands of dollars. So going into this, there was a lot of optimism. And then during this pandemic, there's also been really an energy crisis isn't the answer, but kind of shock. A shock in a good way, I suppose, for people who drive. But the price of oil is absolutely plummeted, largely due to another price-fixing cartel. Of course, they always go awry, but OPEC, all the efforts of these central planners to try to force oil prices up failed. So you also saw in the middle of this, the price of oil drop precipitously. That was a huge shock. But I think, Razi, what really freaked this market out more than anything else was the government response to the virus. You asked about what's the economy's response to the virus. I don't think the economy can survive the virus. I think the question is, can the economy survive the response to the virus? And the most obvious example is lockdowns. South by Southwest, the big music arts conference, they announced that they were shutting down their festival, I believe in early March. In fact, it was the government that came in and said, look, you've got to shut this down. We're not going to let you have that. And I think, at least from my reading and my perspective of these markets, that's when you really had to start a lot of panic. And, I'm not a philosopher when it comes to money management, but I do believe that philosophy ultimately rules money management. And the issue here, I don't think is, can we come up with a fix for the virus? Can we come up with, of course, man can come with that. I think the issue now is, how much government force is there going to be in the economy? Same thing as always. And the more government force, the more government stimulus, I think the bigger and longer lasting problems that the economy is going to have. And I have a few examples, but kind of my headline is that you have to get production going. This has become, at least here, I don't know kind of what the mood is in the UK, but it's become this bullshit political thing now where those evil Republicans want to send everyone back to work and get them sick. And those kind Democrats, there's just, and Dr. Jerome Brook has made this point, and I think he's spot on, is that wealth and health are not mutually exclusive. They have to go together, and you need to get production going. Humankind cannot survive for long without production. You have to find ways, and you were talking before as well is about, for example, people who've already proven Nikos, they've already had it, send them back to work. So you have to get humankind going. You have to get production going on some level. And what you're going to find, I believe, is, as we talked about, there's going to be new production. I mean, let there be a market price for ventilators on Amazon, and let companies put them out there at exorbitant prices, and you're going to see a lot of production moving to that, shifting to that, creative ways. Maybe like 3 guys put it together in one location, and then it goes to another. I mean, companies will come up with ways to do this, but you need the profit motive. Certainly in my business in finance, and we know especially in medicine as well. We talked a bit about price gouging that are restricting supply in every milieu, particularly in medicine. Same thing with tariffs. Dr. Brook and other really smart scholars have talked a lot about this. I mean, this is exactly the time we want to be able to buy anything from China or wherever else. I mean, in China now that they've, in effect, gotten over the hump, there is production opening up there. I mean, this is when globalization, from an economic perspective, can really prove itself. When economies can trade, and whether it's masks or anything else or whatever else we might need, we can source from other places. And not to mention the whole Buy American thing. It really, it's restricting at least government's efforts, I think, to actually provide for the people. And the regulation at every turn, and we talked about testing, Nikos, is like, of course you have to have testing. Because without testing, you quarantine everyone because no one knows shit. But my God, if you can send me $2,500 or $1,000, send me 10 tests. Send everyone 10 tests. Find a way to do it. But here's an article from, I think, TechCrunch from March 23rd. What is today? This is 2 days old. FDA COVID-19 testing guidelines specifically disallow at-home sample collection. So in the midst of all of this, regulators, the FDA is saying, no, we're going to disallow in-home sample collection. And maybe it's not perfect, but maybe we can get some data there, check that against a better, let humans think and find a way to figure this out and put the data together. And it's exactly now with this central planning is what's going to turn, and I do believe, and I'm not a financial historian, but I've read a little bit of it, as you can see. I do believe that the Great Recession, the Great Depression, was a recession that was turned into a Great Depression. And that's really what I fear now, is that this government involvement is going to be destructive at every turn. I have a few examples to give, but Razi, I don't know if you want me to pause for a moment.
No, yeah, please go ahead.
My big idea here is the less government, the better the economy, the better the rebound will be. And the most obvious example that I know I see it as an investor, we've seen a lot of it lately, but people who are around markets have always seen this, are the trading halts. Now, some of you might not have heard of limit up, limit down, because there hasn't been a lot of limits in recent years. But these are limits in how far up and down the futures markets, a lot of individual stocks, and the market writ large are allowed to trade. So most of them, all of them actually, were put in place after 1987. They've been updated over the years. So many times in the last couple of weeks, especially as government has been announcing these plans, changing these plans, you've heard that the market goes limit up and limit down. It's a great, very useful example of why government intervention, these artificial trading halts, actually make markets worse. Now, this is on a very small micro level, but kind of extrapolate this out there. Look at that. You're in the marketplace. You're buying and selling. And the stock, the security, whatever it is, is down 4.5%, right? It's down 4.5%. Is it a buy? Could be. Is it a sell? Could be. But one thing is sure, that if it goes down 5, government's going to shut off the market. And then what? Then you can't get out at any price. Now, this is what people do not understand. I mean, it's objectivists do, because they know you can't fake reality. But when you are threatening to shut down the market or shutting down the market, you're draining liquidity. You're getting people to not incentivizing them to take a shot, to buy that investment, to put liquidity into the market, because they know if it ticks just a little bit lower, they can't get out at any price. And in fact, it's become, I think, pretty fashionable here. I think I saw an article in The Atlantic. I don't know if that's fashionable or not, but I've seen this on my Flipboard. People saying, oh, maybe we should shut down the markets. It needs a cooling off period. And if you're an investor or a capitalist, you should be insulted by that. I mean, what the fuck is a cooling off period? They say that about insane people who want to buy a gun, right? Oh, they need a cooling off period. I mean, that's the whole point of this, is the assumption is that, oh, we can't leave people free because they're going to do something insane during this period. If you want to see a panic, shut down the markets, or even threaten to shut down the markets. You will cause an absolute panic. So let's just make that point, that all this intervention in markets in particular is really screwing them up. Even today, we can talk specifically about individual markets today, but as soon as the Federal Reserve announces that it's going to buy government or corporate bonds for the first time in its history, yesterday you saw $1 billion, the biggest inflow ever into the major corporate bond ETF, LQD, and lo and behold, it was up, I don't know, massive move today. So you see all these dislocations and distortions in the economy, in markets, and the whole point is that is rendering them useless. And I'll just say, I'm happy to talk about my own experience trading and stuff like this, but it really, it forces you to be thinking short term. I was never a short term trader except when I was on the floor of the exchange. These types of environments, how can you invest for something that's going to be 3, 4, 30 years out? I mean, how can you invest in this type of environment when, once again, government's just making up the rules as they go along? So all that intervention, saving, stimulus, all that, it's making it so much more difficult. And for me, at least, it has to prompt me to sit on the sidelines largely. I mean, I have some ideas of investments here, but all the particular market interventions are draining the liquidity. That's the point I want to make. And I see that every day. And spreads on instruments that used to be very narrow are very wide, and it's government that's prompting that. Talk briefly, people have done much better about stimulants and bailouts than I have. And I said, I'm certainly not an economist or historian of this, but I do know that this whole concept of stimulus, it was invented basically prior to the Great Depression, just coming into the Great Depression, by Hoover, by Roosevelt. This notion, and Nikos, again, this is your milieu, so I'm going to glance over it, but boosting aggregate demand. I mean, this notion that, the economy just needs a central planner, but we know that printing money doesn't increase economic output. It just increases the amount of money in circulation and just causes ultimately inflation. Or I think probably even more likely, at least for the US economy, a long period of destructive deflation, i.e. Japan since basically the early 1990s when their big stimulus efforts began. Today there was some announcements, and part of what I find so frustrating about this is all of a sudden as investors, and I know we're talking about the economists, it's like, now you're not even following the markets. You got to follow what the fuck the government's doing. Who are they helping? How is that going to affect? So, and you literally can't keep up with who's going to be stimulating, who's going to bail out. There was some announcements today, I believe, about certain stipulations. Companies that get a bailout can only do this, can only do that. There's going to be buybacks, even limits on compensation. And it's something that these politicians can do to say, see, I'm doing something. I'm cracking down on those evil CEOs, etc. But they don't see, and we talked about this a bit before, is it's the second and third level effects. Economics is all about that. Henry Hazlitt and others wrote extensively about that. It's never that initial, what you see is second and third effect. And my big picture idea here is that to the extent these individual companies and individual countries are stimulated and bailed out, to the extent that they're going to suffer, almost directly proportional. The irony is GM, on which the government lost money, is touted as this great savior. You know what? They ended up not only firing thousands of employees anyway, they screwed the bondholders who actually owned that company back in 2008 and 2009. And more worrisome is that there was tremendous malinvestment. Does anyone remember the Chevy Volt? This was this, unbelievably but ugly car. It's my own estimation, but it was a very unsuccessful car, spearheaded by the Obama administration's de facto ownership of General Motors. We used to call it government motors at that time. for that reason. I made a little money short in the stock. But if you think my fear is now that the same government minders who produce the Chevy Volt are going to be producing Boeing's next model. And you've already seen that. It's something my mom always, kind of taught me, is that he who writes the checks makes the rules. I've quoted it a few times lately, but you see it in front of our eyes. You've got people on the left, I know explicitly, but I have to imagine it's on the right as well, saying, oh, well, these airlines are going to have to be, I don't know, fuel free or peanut free or whatever the hell they're going to have some kind of stipulations about how they're running their business. That's going to be the real long-term detriment. 2008 is probably the best example. Lots of stimulus. It was the slowest recovery in history. This stimulus so far is much bigger. I believe it's almost twice as much. That was $1 trillion. This is now $2+ trillion. And more than anything, what really is frightening me as an investor, and frankly steering some of my investment ideas now, is that I do see this as a way government and statists are taking as an opportunity to take control of the economy. And it's exactly the wrong path to go. I got a little bit of history of the economic situation I'm quoting now. This is from the Von Mises website. I know, take it or leave it, but this is a pretty good historical recollection. And I'll quote for a moment, quote, "The economic situation in 1920 was grim. By that year, unemployment had jumped from 4% to 12%, and GDP had declined 17%. President Hoover urged Harding to consider an array of interventions to turn the country around, but Hoover was ignored. Instead of fiscal stimulus, Harding cut the government's budget in half between 1920 and 1922. You hear anyone, Republican or Democrat, talking about cutting the government's budget? Just the opposite. Quote, "The rest of Harding's approach was equally laissez-faire. Tax rates were slashed for all income groups, and the national debt was reduced by 1/3. The Federal Reserve activity was hardly noticeable. They did not move to use their powers to turn the money supply around. But by 1921, we're talking a year later, unemployment was all the way back down from 6% to then 2% in 1923. So this notion that, oh, we need government to save the economy now, we need government to save us now, it's not borne out in history at all. People are scared about bankruptcy, and sounds kind of scary, but there's really nothing wrong with it. I mean, all of these airlines, which are going to get billions of dollars and being, as I said, scarily taken control of by, I think, a lot of government minders, they've all been bankrupt before. Delta, American, United Airlines, a lot of them weren't foolish during the boom years. They've been very profitable. A lot of them bought back their stock at very high prices. For me, stock buybacks as an investor have actually kind of been a worrisome sign because companies tend to buy back their stocks at a bad time. But bankruptcy is an opportunity. You sound like the world's biggest asshole for saying this, but to clean out some of the bad actors, the weak actors, to reorganize some of these operations. Air traffic and airlines are tremendously regulated in this country. Maybe we only need 2 or 3 American airlines. Maybe we just need 1. It's always, but now is an opportunity to let that capital reallocation effort itself. But what we're doing, unfortunately, as a country is we're going to be socializing the losses and privatizing the gains. And believe me, we're going to be hearing about it for a decade. I mean, I started trading in the mid-90s. And in the early 2000s with Enron and Adelphia, and you younger people probably don't even remember that, but there was a bunch of corporate scandals, and we heard about it for a decade. And of course, all business people were associated with that. And that's really my fears. Once again, it's going to be free markets and capitalism that are tarnished. Oh, the airlines, we had to bail you out. And now you're charging me for the peanuts? We need a government to fix this. We're getting ourselves going down exactly the wrong path. I'll mention too, one other example of stimulus, as I said, Japan is probably the best example. I mean, they've built bridges to nowhere for years. Lots of government graft and government corruption that's already started. The Federal Reserve has now appointed BlackRock. Trump was on the phone with Steven Schwartzman. BlackRock is a publicly traded company. And who's going to steer the tens of billions of dollars in bond purchases? Well, BlackRock, they're going to be in charge of that. It's just tremendous opportunities as government is printing and throwing all this money out for graft, for corruption, just like it was during TARP when Maxine Waters, you might remember that name, might be foreign to you guys in the UK, but when they were bailing at the banks, there's all kind of senators and congressmen who got their little pet family projects taken care of, and it's just a tremendous opportunity for waste. So my big picture idea is that the bigger the stimulus is going to be the slower the recovery. I think there are opportunities to make money. I'm looking at a lot of them. I'm looking at everything from shipping rates. There's a pretty unusual ETF I could talk about in the Q&A that focuses on shipping rates. I'm looking at some commodities. I'm even looking at some stocks. But what you should be resentful for now, I believe, is not the coronavirus, but the government, because they're making this process of trying to move the economy, our own fortunes, and our own lives that much more difficult. So we can do it. The economies of the world economy can bounce back, and we need the only thing that we ever need, which is freedom and the human mind. So, happy to talk markets and stocks, and hope more than anything that everyone is staying safe. My hands, I know, are so chapped, Razi, because I'm washing them every 15 minutes. So I hope that our crew is doing the same.
Yes, and most of us are, we are officially in government lockdown, so most of us, I think, are staying home most of the time. So Nikos has his hand up, but first, Gloria joined us. So Gloria, do you have any opening remarks that you would like to make?
I actually think that this is a great opportunity, as you were saying, to reestablish what industries, what services, what professions are going to be way more successful after the coronavirus. I think one of the myths that is going to be debunked is the fact that homeschool and education through the internet, at least in Latin America, where there was this fixated idea that only the government can provide education. I think that now that everyone is forced to stay home and no kid can go to school, all the parents are looking at the marvels of internet with seminars, with different complete courses for them. So I think that in the education industry, there's a lot to be done. I also believe that some professions are going to be more valued than others. Maybe health. I think that the example of North Korea and countries that have more freedom towards choosing the type of health system that you want to have had better results than the ones that have, fixated health systems such as Italy or Spain, where they're actually choosing who dies or who lives, which is very hard. And I also think that maybe one of the things that people are going to question after this crisis is the manufacturing of unnecessary goods versus having better quality of products. This because I've seen, at least here in Australia, a lot of stores going bankrupt for delivering products that in the end of the day, people are thinking, okay, this is not something that I need to survive. But then again, what are the things that we do need to have a better life or a healthy life? And maybe those industries are going to peak. And also, I think that the privatization of different goods and industries that are helpful with the environment, because I heard a lot of people talking about, how now that the humanity is locked down, nature is recovering itself, which I think, yeah, it's a good thing. We do pollute the planet. I don't know about climate change, but I do know that there's a lot of economic opportunity in having market solutions for pollution. And I think that the economy after the coronavirus can help that way.
Gloria, can I, first of all, great to even hear you. I met you briefly at Ocon in past, and just followed your career and just love what you do and all your advocacy. So I'm delighted to be able to share this with you. She makes the point too about why does it take a crisis for government to say things get bad? Maybe we better reduce some regulations so that we can speed up, if reducing regulations can speed up production, why do we need to wait for a crisis for it to unfold? And for me, at least, when I see, that's what really worries me, Razi. You know that line from Batman, which I never saw the movie, but I know the line when they say, some people in effect just want to watch the world burn. You remember that one? And what is so disheartening now is not just that everyone is advocating for stimulus and bailouts and all the effect, but as Gloria said, I mean, people are celebrating empty cities. People are celebrating no industry being shut down. I live in a city, and walking around an empty city feels terrible. It's soulless. It's absolutely, it's awful. It feels like dystopian in a terrible way. So I want to see smokestacks going again. I want to see cabs blazing again, and we need freedom to do it. And as Gloria said, what you'll get is new production and all new types of facilities that we never even thought we knew or needed.
Gloria, if you have something to add, go ahead, and then we'll go to Nikos.
I do believe that a lot of people are looking for advice in what to do right now. And I think that the Keynesian alternative of giving subsidies and bailouts that are gonna be paid who knows when, if they ever get paid or they just amount to massive debt. One of the things that you can, advise to people, and I've been planning on a video about like the Corona economy and how to surf the wave and look this as an opportunity, is instead of waiting for the government to do massive regulations or price controls, I have 3 countries that are referenced and are doing completely opposite things. So Mexico is doing nothing. You go to the airport and they're mixing airplanes from the United States and Europe, and the labels of people getting the coronavirus is not even known, because apparently some of them are being diagnosed as only having a flu or a cold. So people are expecting some crisis like what happened in Italy to happen in Mexico. Now, some of the people in Mexico have said, yes, the thing is that we have informal economies that live by the day. So if you send everybody home, we're going to have more deaths for starvation than we're going to have for the coronavirus. So they're basically doing nothing for this. They have some, like private individuals that in the news and the radio are giving the common, advice of wash your hands and don't cough without covering, wear a mask, etc., and try to be home as much as possible. Then you have Guatemala, which is right next door. Guatemala has a curfew at 4 p.m. It has been mandatory from the government down for people to stay home. There are even police officers watching that everyone abides for this curfew. No stores can be open except if you are a drugstore, a supermarket, or a common market. We also have 80% of informal economy. So the worry is being in lockdown for 8 days, and how sustainable is this going to be for the people that live day by day? And then I have El Salvador. So in El Salvador, more than the lockdown and the curfew, they are also manipulating the economy, something that Guatemala hasn't done. So the president basically froze the prices, and he forced the internet, the cell phone, electricity, water, and there was something else that they cannot charge people for the next 3 months. What he doesn't explain is what are the families gonna live on, the ones that work on these industries. So apparently he just got a loan for the IMF of $400 million. So no one knows who's gonna pay that. So it's fully Keynes, right? So you have fully a Keynes approach. But then in Guatemala, where you do have a lockdown and you have a curfew, you have more people in prison because they are they haven't obeyed the curfew. So you have more than 500 people in jail because they didn't obey on the first day of the curfew, right? And only if you have the money for the bailout, you get out. Now that can also, be a risk for people getting sick. I don't know if there's someone with coronavirus in jail, but that's how things are happening. But in Guatemala, the people are getting to individual agreements. So restaurants, bars, the banks, even they have voluntarily decided to do some flexibility in the credit payments, to cut down the salaries and the rents. So because they don't want to go to the point where everybody goes bankrupt without a job, what they do is they rebudget what they have. So some people are doing the exercise of sitting down with their budget and thinking, okay, what are the things that I'm definitely not spending during this economy? Well, you're not spending in entertainment. You're not spending in a lot of different things. What can you do to then sit down with your businesses and then have a salary that is less until this crisis is over? And because individuals are making these decisions, the left-wing parties and the Communist Party of Guatemala trying to push for an agenda that is similar to El Salvador's agenda has not been successful in doing it, because people are sitting down with individual ideas. It's actually happening. So I think that with those three examples, you can, and me being in Australia, where like what I see is, yes, there hasn't been a mandatory obligation for people to go home, but I have seen businesses here in Manly saying that they're going bankrupt because they cannot sustain this crisis.
Yeah, and I think here in the UK, they're trying to basically try all of the above. They've tried every approach, and now it seems like we're heading down the slippery slope to tyranny. Although Nikos disagrees with me on this, so Nikos, go ahead.
Right. So I have a question, and actually there are many good questions on the chat, but I will use the co-chair privilege to ask the first question. So in very simple words, so what the average person would say is, look, I can understand why a greedy capitalist like Jonathan is going to lose money on this. But why would my barbershop or my martial arts dojo not be there when I go back, even if it's 3 months? Right? So it makes sense for the guy who rents the shop to my barber not to take rent for 3 months, because otherwise he will lose a good client, let's say. It makes sense for my martial arts dojo not to close the dojo, because at some point we will be back. So, and no, actually I won't put it together with Noah's question, but in simple terms, why would these small businesses, okay, they suffer now because they haven't got liquidity, but what if in 3 months, everything is going to be the same? They will be there. We will be hungry for life because we've been stuck in for even, let's say, 3 months, worst case scenario or whatever. So why should we worry that in 3 months, as they say, the real economy, which is not what you supposedly, greedy people do in the stock market, why wouldn't the real economy just be there in 3 months and we just hit pause now? I'm playing devil's advocate, but that's like a general question which is out there.
I'll offer 2 cents, and as I said, I mean, I'm and I'd love to hear Gloria's perspective. I mean, that's, I think, one of the things that's so frustrating, Nikos, is that, for example, the martial arts instructor, as you mentioned, I mean, first of all, I do believe there's going to be a lot of goodwill, if you will, benevolence. You're going to see a lot of landlords saying, and look, I own some properties and I'm expecting this. A lot of landlords saying, all right, you can get me in 2 months, you can get me in 3 months. A lot of debt is going to become, quote, distressed for a period of time. That's kind of the nature. I mean, interest rates, if you will, because the risk has risen, interest rates do have to rise. So you will see some of that. But in the meantime, why couldn't, for example, the martial arts instructor, maybe they can't carry on business as usual, but maybe they can see, 2 clients in a very big space for a short period of time at a high price. There's some business that can start to get done. And here in the States, you're seeing companies now incentivize people to take jobs. Smuckers is offering, I think, a $1,500 bonus. Mondelez, which makes the cookies, among other things. They've got a $2 an hour raise in hourly wage, and for a $18 job or whatever, that's a pretty good deal. So you're even seeing some of these type of creative ideas, as I've talked about, like these dining bonds, where restaurants are selling $100 worth of food to be consumed in a year for $75 now. So you're starting to see creative efforts to move forward. And what worries me, Nikos, is exactly what Gloria referred to, is that the economy, I don't think it's not like a laptop that you can just restart it and everything runs back to where it is. And the longer you prevent people from thinking, from working, from interacting, the longer it is, the harder it is to get that wonderful machine rolling again.
Gloria?
Yes, sorry, I didn't know that I had my video on. So yes, I do agree on you on that exactly. The economy is millions of individual decisions taking place every single second. So what's happening right now is that those millions, thousands of millions of individual decisions are being shrunk down. But that doesn't mean that those individuals stop from existing. So the only question is how many of those individual minds are going to be captured by Keynesian politicians that are going to fool them into thinking, listen, I'm going to do all the math for you. I'm going to do all the budget for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze salaries. I'm going to freeze prices, which what is going to cause is a scarcity. Because on the good side, people think, oh, I'm not going to have to pay my credit card for the next 3 months. But the downside of that is the fact that it's not only the debts that you're not going to pay, is if you force people with control prices in different goods, you're going to have a scarcity on those goods. And no one here is able to produce 95% of the things that they consume, starting for food, medicine, etc. So I'm also listening a lot of rhetoric from the socialists and progressives saying, you see, this crisis has come to show that capitalism doesn't work and that the free market is an absolute error. And I'm like, no, actually what this crisis is proving is that we're all interdependent. Not every one single human being is capable of creating by their own vaccine. It's like we should do iPencil of Leona Reed and modernize her to iVaccine, and maybe people understand about like the interdependence of the market. So because it is about millions of individual decisions, the question is how many of those individuals are going to be able to think by themselves and do their own budget? Because it is evident that if you come to agreements, for example, I was talking yesterday to a friend in Guatemala. She has a daughter. So she has fixed costs that she cannot move. One of them is a school and the other one is the school bus. So and she also has to pay rent, and her business is Airbnb. So the problem she has is she's not getting any tourists because Guatemala shut down the airport, and there's a major lockdown curfew at 4 p.m. So she's not getting any income. But the school is also demanding her to pay monthly, and the guy from the school bus also. So what I said to her is, listen, what you can do, and not only you, but all the parents of the school, is get together, go to the school and say, okay, if the monthly fee is, let's say, $100, let us give you this month $40 or $50. I don't know. Come up to a price that it's not zero, but that it is something. And you do the same with the school bus. And then you sit down with the people that you have to pay rent to. Because everybody in a shutdown economy is, wasting or spending less. So they don't need that much money. But if you don't do those individual arrangements and you just wait at your home for some Keynesian politician to sell you the illusion that they will fix it for you, we are going to have more bankruptcies and we're going to have more unemployments because people just get, instead of making decisions, they just go to a stagnation mode. And as you already said, I mean, the economy is not a laptop that you just can restart. It's how many of those individual decisions can we maintain alive during for it to be easier to restart the economy on a normal situation. And one of the points is it's really defending the cause of free markets and not letting the global rhetoric go to the point of saying that this is something that proved that capitalism failed. I think that we do need to do that battle.
So we have a question from Vladi, and then we will go to the chat. If nobody else raises their hand, we will prioritize live questions. So if nobody has a live question, we'll go to the chat. Vladi?
You greatly answered actually most of my question, but still I should ask, because of where we've gotten to prior to this current crisis, largely through cheap credit and stimulus, not just from the US, but most developed economies, I'm wondering whether we could even get through this without more stimulus, because of all the very highly leveraged positions that everyone's in. And even going back to Nikos's question, about, for example, landlords dealing with gym rent and stuff like that. I've heard that quite a few of them have taken out a lot of mortgages in order to actually obtain a lot of their properties. And so they can't really miss out on even a few months or a month's worth of revenue in many of their cases. And now so many retailers are like going into bankruptcy, or practically everyone's asking to renegotiate their debts or their rents. So I'm just wondering, well, basically that's kind of an explanation to his question, but my question is more so, do you think we'd have like a worse catastrophe without having some stimulus now, or is that just kicking the can down the further towards the cliff edge?
I agree with you. I think there will be more stimulus, and there's historical precedent for this. I mean, going back to the 2008 financial crisis here in the States, my memory is a little foggy, but I mean, there was the initial TARP bill that I think was $700 billion. That's like chump change now. Now we're well into the trillions. And then a couple months after that, there was a quote unquote stimulus bill. And I think you're right. What you're going to see now, because even the so-called advocates for capitalism have acquiesced. They've sanctioned this notion that, of course, government has to step in to save jobs, not seeing, the unhand scene, as Gloria alluded to, of the new jobs that could be potentially created. So you're going to see all types of bailouts for everything from casino companies, I think, to hoteliers, and I think that's just the beginning of that. And does that create the next crisis? What it does, I think, for me as an investor, is it makes it very difficult to invest in these types of companies. It makes it almost uninvestable to invest in companies that actually, they think that it helps, but it really makes it, I think, more difficult because you don't know what government's next move. And my belief is that there will be more stimulus, and it's going to be a drag and a retard on any potential for growth, at least in the near term.
Thank you.
I do agree that momentaneous, subsidies and measures that in the short term work, on the long run are worse. And I always remember the 1929 crisis and the decisions that were never made to go back to the gold standard, and how this created money that has no backup whatsoever. So every crisis that came after that is gonna be a reason to expand this logic, which I think that in the long run is worse. I am personally, I think that shock therapies work both to open the markets and both during crisis. It's better to have realistic numbers and counting on real wealth than trying to
to draw it out.
with an artificial economy that actually doesn't exist, and just with the illusion of the government fixing the problems. I do believe that the bureaucrats should downsize their salaries. I do believe that the first segment that should cut costs and should, shut down right now is the government, because the governments don't produce any wealth. So right now, the ones who need a break are the creators of wealth, not the ones that just spend the wealth that is made. So I think that almost no country is prioritizing that. Almost no country is starting the downside with the government, then going to the formal economy, and then going to the informal economy. I think that that's the proper order to do it. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing is completely the reverse. Is the economy taking down, cuts and downsides, and the government's staying, almost with no changes whatsoever.
And maybe to your point, it's a shock. It's clarified as a shock treatment, if you will. But that's reality, isn't that what we want? We want to be dealing with reality. And as you think, I hear you alluding to, is like these. And Iceland is often pointed out as the prototypical example of how they handled the financial crisis. I know, as you know, is that in effect they let the banks go bankrupt. They were wiped out. They were recapitalized. I don't think it's an exact model, but if Boeing went to zero and the shareholders got wiped out, it would be pretty horrible. But the bondholders and various bondholders would own the company, would be recapitalized. Then and only then can it start rehiring and the economy can move forward. But this notion, which is a political notion, I know you're exactly right, of government has to save jobs, makes the process that much more difficult. And I remember from 2008. Look, I'm looking as an investor. I know I sound like Peter Schiff or what do they call them? The ads on TV, but gold is looking better and better these days, because it doesn't have all these obligations. It doesn't have any debt associated with it. And even after the financial crisis of 2008, gold prices nearly doubled. So just to bring it a bit back to kind of the real world here, and I think, as I said, more government gets involved and more things like hard assets and precious metals, I think look as pretty good at investments.
Well, would you guys both be then in favor of deregulating our monetary system and perhaps moving towards something like gold? Because, well, at least in that scenario, you can't just keep printing more unbacked stimulus.
I personally would, and I believe that competition is what makes everything more efficient, from products to services. So free competition of different currencies, if they may be electronic or backed by gold or whatever it is that brings competition to the monopolies that the government has, especially in the money that we use, I think it would be beneficial.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't studied the Austrians. I know, like Nikos and Gloria, you have. Unfortunately, at least here in the States, not only obviously can those types of changes, wholesale changes, not be made in a time of crisis, but what's so frustrating and sad now is that we've moved so far away of, like, no one here is saying end the Fed. No one here is saying, there's just, that's gone.
Yeah.
There's no talk of getting government out of the economy. There's talk of everyone of, well, God, we need government here to step in and save the economy. So we've moved further away in the last 12 years of getting government out of manipulating and regulating the markets. And I think that's, we're on a much weaker foundation, ironically, than we were back in 2009 for that reason.
Jonathan, you mentioned ETFs. That you had a suggestion for ETFs. Could you explain to the audience what an ETF is?
Sure. So an ETF is an exchange-traded fund. Basically, it's a mutual fund that trades like a stock on a stock exchange. And they were born, I don't know, maybe like 30 years ago now. But in effect, it's a way to take a position in almost anything, long or short, meaning betting that's going to go on or going down. And they've, become just a very useful, the kind of de facto ways to allocate assets and really to watch markets now. And, I hesitate always to kind of talk about individual recommendations because you have to understand that especially now, I'm holding trades very, very shortly. As you know, as I said, the government is making, I think, very difficult to invest. But something like TLT is an ETF that tracks the price of long-term government bonds. And if you look at it, it's just gone nuts lately. It really has gone nuts. And there's tremendous, but one idea is, someone asked in the chat, like, I haven't read any suggestions about a solution, My feeling is my voice isn't going to change what these regulators do. And no one's listening to us as objectivists. No one's taking our advice. So I'm just trying to play the markets and make money off of it. TLT is, I think, a real benchmark you have to watch right now. I mean, it could be the best short you've ever made. I don't know what it's yielding now, maybe 1.5%. Do you want to lend money to the federal government for 30 years at 1.5%? I mean, if you think not, it could be a great short. And I've been trying to short it, not very successfully in the last couple of weeks. But I think if you're worried, for example, about a lot of government spending and think that's ultimately going to raise interest rates, that's one to watch. What's annoying and frustrating about this whole game is that, as we always say, it's like you don't know how it's going to turn out. And Japan is the best example. They've maintained negative or ultra low interest rates for 20 years. And it's not that rates spiked, but it's that the economy was just moribund. So, it's not a sure thing, but, TLT, I think, is an interesting short. One that I really like right now that I have lost money on, but it's the type of, is this boring for everyone? I don't know. Is this kind of talking stocks? It's kind of obscure, but I don't want to monopolize with this junk, Razi, if this is not what you had in mind.
No, I think, it was Alejandro's question. So if
all right, well, real quickly, I'll just give two more. I don't want to go on too much, but there's one in the States, which is BDRY, Boy, David, Roger, Y, yellow. It's pretty unusual. It tracks freight futures, and it's weak. So I don't like to buy weak assets in general. But I think if you start to see prices rise without corresponding production capacity, i.e. inflation, it's a pretty unusual asset. So, and I said, I think platinum, so there could be opportunities in a lot of markets now. So look, I think outside the box is my 2 cents. Is there might be better ideas than Amazon or Apple or some of the old players. But always do your own due diligence and cut the losses and let the winners run, right?
Gloria.
I think that that what you were explaining is something that should be, globally known as different alternatives. As I was saying, I think this is a good opportunity to come up with good ideas on how to deal with this crisis. What I would like to see is a commitment towards that. Like what is going to be the strategy into taking this information to the public in general, and also what ideas do you guys have for the mainstream rhetoric that is going against free markets, that is going for more government intervening the economy? Like, what things can we learn? Because yesterday, for example, I was debating with someone on the internet, on my social media, and they were like, yeah, well, I mean, the financial crisis of 2008 was the proof that, free markets don't work and they need to be regulated. And I'm like, how did that happen? How is it that out of 10 people, 8, understand or think that the 2008 crisis was a product of the free markets failing, when it all started with, government allowing the banks to give loans to people that could not pay them back, and then rescuing those banks with taxpayers' money that were in no way guilty of those bad decisions. So it's like, it's a constant wheel of government regulation, one after the other. But then when everything hits and when everything happens, people blame the market for it. So what can we do for this crisis of the coronavirus, not to go down on history as, oh yeah, and that also proved that capitalism doesn't work? How can we make people conscious of the fact that now that they're home and that they are more aware on how much they need the talents of individuals that they don't even know, that this doesn't go down in history as just, oh yeah, another failure of capitalism?
Shall we go to the question posed by Noi? So the theme of the question, and Jonathan has started addressing it on the chat, but also I want to ask this question to both the speakers. For good or for bad, the health system is run at the moment by the state. And the state is telling us that, look, if a lot of people rush in the hospitals, we can't deal with it. And we will have to make very bad decisions, like if you're above some age, basically we'll let you die, which we see already happening in other countries. Taking this into accordance, couldn't we say that the lockdown makes sense in terms of it's either that or the system that we don't like, but that's the existing health system, cannot cope with it? And the second question, which is a bit more kind of a philosophical question, we still don't know everything. So for example, there's this idea that even young people can end up with lung problems. So since we don't know anything, shouldn't we go with the worst case scenario, which is this might be bad also, let's say, for less vulnerable groups. Therefore, again, the lockdown is correct. So I'm playing devil's advocate for the lockdown on two arguments. The one is the health system is not going to cope. The second is, what if the worst case scenario comes true? And I'm not putting words in Noy's question. I'm kind of rephrasing it a bit.
Well, I see two different not two different realities, but two things happening. In the third world, or what you would call Latin America, since the health system is so bad, everybody and their mother has some kind of private insurance, unless you are really, really poor, right? So because no one depends on the health system, and the people who do is because, okay, they don't have any alternative. So for example, what they did in Guatemala is that they have one hospital, it's a state hospital, that they dedicated for coronavirus. But we only have 19 cases. So, it's manageable. Why? Because they did a lockdown. And not only they did a lockdown, they did a curfew. And on the first day that the curfew was implemented, 500 people got arrested. So it's like the president is behaving towards Guatemala like little children that don't know how to behave, and he's like, if you are going to be in the street, I'm going to put you in jail. So I think that you have to have different approaches according to the level of culture of your societies. Right? Because, for example, here in Australia, I see that people keep their 1 meter distance, they sneeze and they cough covering their mouth, they're using masks. It doesn't have to be super mandatory. But what I'm also seeing is that the developed world, so Europe, the United States, even here in Australia, in the developed world, middle class, upper class, that in the third world would rely on private health, here they don't. They rely on public health. So that's why you're seeing the hospitals being collapsed, because they don't have any alternative. So it's quite ironic for me. Why would you, if you are richer and you have more money, why wouldn't you have your own health system? Why wouldn't you have your own private insurance? That it means that the brainwash has been effective, that the state has been effective enough to manipulate you into believe that they will take care of you. So now what is happening in Italy and in Spain that I have shared on my social media, I've been like, all people that all their lives have been paying to sustain that state are now being, mistreated by this state, led to die, because they are not even taking care of them. And you can see in the statistics, if you are 75 years or old, the probability is that they're gonna let you to die. So I think that the developed world could learn a lesson from the third world and stop the illusion that the public health system is actually efficient. And maybe after this crisis, everybody, especially if you have the money for it, buy your go to private hospitals, have your private insurance. I mean, if people in Latin America were with less money, one of the first things they do when they leave poverty and they start being part of the upper middle class is, having a health system, because they know that the state is not going to care for them. Why is it that in the developed world you guys forgot to do that?
I think it's a great observation, and especially the difference between the more private, and I'm speaking a little bit, as I said, out of my kind of area of expertise here, but I am an investor, but I'll just, from my own experience, even today, I have to say, so today I was having kind of an eye problem and was able to get, even in the middle of this lockdown here where I live, and everything's supposed to be closed, and in fact, I was able to get my eye doctor to meet me at her office. She was completely suited up like in a hazmat suit, but kind of give me a scan on private time, didn't charge me out the way out the door, and assure me that I wasn't having a clot or an explosion or whatever in my eye, and in a quick visit, but her office was completely closed. And Gloria, to your point, would that kind of care and transaction can't occur when government is holding a gun to everyone's head and saying, don't move, don't move. The failure of the health system, again, is the fact that it is government controlled to the extent that it's government controlled. And I guess people are saying, what should government be doing? And again, I'm feeling a little bit speaking out of my area of expertise, but I guess more than anything, starting with honest information. I mean, and I'm not taking political sides here, but I remember Trump, at some point saying, it's 10 people now who are infected, and it's going to be 2 in a couple of weeks. You might remember that tape. And I don't know anything about infections, and this is kind of not my area, but now when you look back at that, it demonstrates such a complete ignorance of just the nature of infection. As Nikos, I think you said, I mean, this has been spreading and for spreading months. So this notion that the government would kind of downplay the severity, would hope that they would have maybe incentivized exactly the supply that we need right now. I mean, as soon as they knew this was, why does it take the crisis, for example, to relax the rules on telemedicine or teleeducation, as you alluded to, Gloria? Apple or anyone else could have been getting into this respirator game months ago, I think, if that knowledge and information wasn't downplayed, I think, by our authorities. So the only thing that can solve a shortage is more production. And I think that's what's going to solve the shortage of medicine or anything else.
There's another interesting question in the chat. It asks, how do we balance what kind of economic cost is worth it, if that makes sense, the term, in terms of how many lives we save? And the question has to do with the UK. So if, let's say, for example, we take the Imperial College survey, which was the most gloomy and pessimistic, and at the end of the crisis, we say we are in a 2-year, let's say, recession, but we've saved 300,000 lives. Is there any way we can make kind of for lack of a better term, cost-benefit analysis so what economic damage is worth it for the very difficult situation that we are in? I mean, I know it's difficult to answer, but your thoughts.
I think that I wouldn't measure it towards the death toll. I would measure it towards the amount of jobs and employments that were realistically, not artificially, not with subsidies, but realistically maintained in the country versus the amount of people who didn't get sick. That's what I would, relate. For example, I want to see the numbers. I will do a comparison of Mexico, that is doing pretty much anything. I don't know if because yesterday there was a lot of pressure for the president to do something similar than what is being done in Guatemala and in the United States, like a lockdown. I don't know if the president is going to finally, agree on that. But if he stays the same, we have a country that hasn't done that much, no lockdown, no economic shutdown, but still you don't see the rates of death that you are seeing in Spain and Italy, or the hospitals collapse. I don't know why, but it would be interesting to find out. Then you have Guatemala, where you do have a lockdown, where there are certain businesses that are allowed to function. And then you have El Salvador, that is going full on with all these Keynesian subsidies and measures and bailouts. So what I would measure as, what to relate is, in the long run, which of the three was the country that could sustain more lives or more livelihoods, because they have fewer bankruptcies and fewer unemployment. I think that's a more valid measure than saying this amount of lives amounts for this amount of dollars. I don't think that you can, people are going to tell you that one life is worthy enough.
Jonathan.
Your question, Nikos, I don't like your question, respectfully. And, you said, how do we, we decide or we balance that? And, here in the States, what you're hearing a lot is like, well, when is Trump going to reopen the economy? And he says, oh, maybe it'll be Easter, maybe that day. And, I'm a little offended by that, this notion like, well, we need a king to come out and say, I declare that you can all leave your houses again. I mean, there's, you're free. I mean, there should be something offensive, I think, by that. I think you have to, more than anything, and again, it's weird, Nikos, because this is still not I'm a stock picker, so but for my mind, it's like you have to take care of yourself more than anything. My mom, who happens to be in her 80s, she hibernated herself like 2.5 weeks ago. She said, I don't like the sound of this. And I haven't, seen her since that period of time. And she's wisely, and so you have to, I think, take precautions for yourself and decide for yourself. And, if there is an opportunity to work or to go out, to take those precautions, to wash your hands and do everything else, I think you should, if there's an opportunity to work, you should demand, in quotes, that your office and your employer take extra precautions at this time. And if you're an employer, you should want to do that to alleviate your employer's fear, like, no, we're going to make this safe for everyone. But more than anything, now is a great time. For months on Fox and for a long time, I always got kind of made fun of when I said that, you want to live beneath your means and have a savings a plan and kind of plan for a rainy day. And people always think they're going to get bailed out by the government. So, if $1,000, if you don't have $1,000, a lot of Americans don't. I mean, I think especially in what's supposedly been such a good economy, you're not planning, you're not thinking long term. So, what can you do? What can you do? I mean, we used to talk about the Depression era mentality in America. Well, that was born because people went through a depression and they learned to kind of deal with it. So let this be a lesson to all of us that, now is the time when it feels great to have an extra 5 or 10,000 or whatever sitting in a bank account and know that you're not waiting for a stimulus check from Uncle Sam.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Another question in the chat. So most of the policies seem to be focused on boosting demand, which kind of made sense, at least in the Keynesian way, in some previous crises. But the question is, how will these policies be able to address supply-related issues in your view? So the idea is, when you shut down the economy, it's not necessarily a demand problem because you have, let's say, money to spare. It's a supply problem because the economy is shut. So how do you see the government measures having an effect on the supply side of the economy?
Again, you have different cases, right? I think there's gonna be scarcity in the countries where there have been mandatory price controls and that the king of the economy has forced certain sectors to not charge for their services, versus the ones that individually or voluntarily have come to some arrangements. I think that in the first cases, supply is just going to be impossible in the long run. There's going to be scarcity, and you're going to start seeing scarcity. Now, where Also, another thing that is happening is that when you are in a crisis like this, and I've seen it in for example, clothing shops here in Australia, they still remain open, but because of the panic, no one is buying clothes. So there are just, industries and products that no one thinks they need when the world is coming to an end. Who's gonna buy a pretty dress when there's no wedding to go or there are no events? So I think we also should communicate ideas on the things that or the opportunities that can open within this economy, instead of just persisting in people opening shops of products that might not get sold. I mean, if you are in the industry of food, good for you, or a drugstore, or like hygiene products, yeah, those things are going to be needed. But if you sell, I don't know, watches or sunglasses or clothes, even if your economy is open, probably your demand is going to come down. So you have to come up with another thing to do. And there was one platform that they started in Guatemala, because most people don't save up in the bank, and they live by the day. But there were a lot of shortages in the supermarkets because they had all this panic shopping where people went and buy whatever they could get and leave the supermarket empty. So one guy invented this platform, and it's about going back to I don't know how to say in English, trueque, like when you change one good for another good.
Barter.
Barter, yes. To go back to bartering. So basically, you go on your phone and you say, guys, I have I don't know, 100 water bottles. I can exchange 50 for 2 packages of meat or whatever. And people are, arranging in supply and demand without using money, just bartering from the things that they already have in their house. I think that's a pretty creative way and a solution for the people that don't have money in the bank, or that they have, are in a business that is just not getting any demand right now.
Yeah, I mean, Nikos, I agree. And Gloria is alluding to some of these creative ways. I mean, I think what I understand the question to be, government is pushing on this lever. Well, shouldn't it be pushing on that lever? And it's like, well, what is the best way to central plan now, or something like that? And it's going to be a failure no matter what it is, a failure for all of us ultimately, but for someone in the near term. Harry Binswanger, I hope I'm quoting him directly, but he's got a wonderful course called Philosophy of Economics. And his statement is that there's no economics of non-market systems. Meaning it's either a market, a real market, or it's a market and a gun brought that is kind of changing it all up for everyone. And Gloria mentioned some of these. So I don't think it's going to be the right type of stimulus or incentivizing demand, incentivizing supplies. I think it's going to be things like micro-lending, which had a boom for a while. I think it's a great time for micro-lending to come back. Essentially, someone who needs money can source out a loan from a lot of different lenders, oftentimes at high rates, but as a way to raise capital. If they deregulate some financial markets, you could see even small companies selling and raising shares and raising money that way. There's already jokes on social media I've certainly seen about people selling things on eBay. I mean, the market and free people do figure it out and will figure it out. So that's what we need, not the right type of stimulus or the right type of tweaking with zillions and zillions of dollars.
Right. Thank you. Razi, feel free to jump in if I've missed a question from the chat, because there are so many. So we have one which is a bit more philosophical. I'm not sure if I get it right, but so Danieru says that the problem that a lot of people miss the right reading of the situation is that they have an original sin, religious or secular. So I guess it means they have this element of guilt, or that they have to sacrifice, I don't know, maybe stay inside for the sake of the elderly or whatever. So the question of this member of the audience is, how would you get someone to identify that they hold this self-sacrificial view, in my understanding, and then how would you persuade them to reject it? I mean, if I can paraphrase the question a bit, and again, in every question I'm playing devil's advocate, isn't it worth it that we all stay in for the sake of our parents and grandparents?
I had a personal experience with that when I arrived in Australia and I was doing a tour of conferences. I got here on March 9, and by March 11, because of the air conditioner and the high temperatures of Perth, I started getting, flu symptoms. I started coughing, my nose was running, and then I went to an event where pretty much everybody was 70 years older. And then I started thinking, what if I have the virus? Like, what if this is just not a cold? And maybe I'm not a threat to myself, but I'm gonna be a threat to others. And this is way before the world went crazy. Okay, this is like days before it all exploded. It was more of like an individual decision. And I went and I did the test, which is a horrible test. Like they put a stick up of your nose all the way to your brain and then back to your throat. And they told me that I would have the results in 72 hours. So basically, I had to be forced to be self-quarantined for 3 days in a hotel, and the 72 hours actually became more than 100. Finally, the results came back, and they were negative, but it turned out that in one of my flights, there was one person with coronavirus. In that same period, Tom Hanks was positive of coronavirus here in Australia. The Ministry of Migration as well, they shut down the Formula One, they shut down the Fashion Week. So you start, watching little by little how the world becomes, more aware of this menace, of this threat. And I actually individually thought, yeah, it was a good thing that I did the test, because in that moment I didn't know. I had a horrible cough. I felt very bad. I didn't have fever. That was the only thing why they didn't hospitalize me, because I didn't have fever. But yes, there is an element, if you have the symptoms, that you are going to believe that you can be a threat to someone else. I don't know if that is what he goes by, this secular original sin, but I can tell you, if you feel symptoms of flu, you are gonna feel self-aware that you can be a harm to others.
Thanks. We have the person who asked this question. So
yeah, what I was thinking was that like everyone's blaming capitalism for this, and like I think that's based in original sin, like people doing things, dealing with it as people and trading, like that specifically, like seems to be based in original sin. How would you like get them to realize they're seeing it that way, and then like open their eyes to that and get them to stop believing in original sin, I guess?
I would use the play the guilt card back to them. I just posted, for example, on my Facebook a drawing of an old man who sells ice cream, with these little carts in the streets of Guatemala, and it says, the lockdown is not that easy when you live on day by day. So when I posted that, I said, may I remind you that now more than ever, we can be conscious that we all depend on a market that brings us the food, the medicine, and the things that we need in order to survive. And not every one of us has, is lucky enough to save on that market in order to be in lockdown for 6 months. There are people that need to work, or otherwise they're gonna starve. So if you play the guilt card back to them with a message that of how the invisible hand, eye pencil, all those tools that are very useful for people to understand that we all depend on information that we don't have ourselves in order to have the things that benefit our life. Capitalism is not about Kim Kardashian going shopping, $50,000 diamond necklace, okay, or Ferraris. Capitalism is about people who live day by day and are going to starve unless the economy starts again. Like that is the message or the communication that at least has been useful for me during this time. But about guilt and sin, I mean, religious views have taken this to levels that I've never seen before. I see people saying that this is God's punishment because there's Christianity in the world. I've seen the same said by Muslims, that is because there are Muslims in this world, so this is the punishment. I've heard it's because some countries have legalized abortion, and coronavirus is, the sin of it. I mean, magical religious views of finding why this is a punishment. It's not only capitalism. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, no question too, Daniel, people are using this as an opportunity to, fit in with their own pre-existing notion of how, capitalism is caused all this. And, I've watched a lot of the advocacy that Razi does, that Gloria does, that Yaron Brook and others do of, how to change the culture. That's the hardest thing. I mean, at least in the near term, what I'm trying to emphasize is, I think always, but certainly now, you say to people, look around at anything and everything you value has to be created by someone. It doesn't grow in the ground, whether it's, the hamburger stand near me, which thankfully is still open. So I'm still, eating very well. I think, unfortunately, a little too well. But to the scientists now who are in Zoom conferences and in laboratories working on whatever the medicine is that's going to save us from all of this. It doesn't come from government decree. It comes from exactly what Gloria started with, is these voluntary relationships, profit-oriented among willing men. So maybe appeal to people's self-interest and say, aren't you appreciative that there are people out there pursuing a buck now more than ever, because they're the ones they're the atlases, at least for now, that are really keeping our lives and the economy going.
So here's another question, and apologies if I've missed a question from the chat. Please feel free to copy and paste it to the bottom, because there are many questions. So Elle asks a question which we've partly addressed, but we can reformulate it. So the government, she says, is reviewing the lockdown on a day-by-day basis because the situation is uncertain. In this case, what principles should our choices be based on? On a utilitarian perspective, can we really predict the net cost of lockdown versus premature deaths? So basically, I know you won't like this situation, Jonathan, but let's say you're the center planner or the king tomorrow. How do you go on? So we are where we are. Maybe we shouldn't have been here, but we are where we are. So we have two philosopher kings, and it's Gloria and it's Jonathan. Do you go on tomorrow and say everything back to normal? Or because we are where we are, you take a more step-based approach? And what is your principle? Is it the utilitarian principle, or is it another principle?
Who is the famous economist who was asked, what would you do? Was it Von Mises or was it Milton Friedman who was asked, what would you do if you were appointed king?
Oh, it was Friedman, yeah.
And what did he say?
That I don't want to be appointed the king.
He would resign. And I'm not a good central planner, but the only thing I would know to do would be to systematically start to deregulate and decontrol and let people make some of these decisions on their own in terms of their lives, their health, their businesses, their production. There's no other formula that I'm aware of that's ever produced any wealth under good times or bad than freedom. And we need now more than ever.
And a comment maybe on the utilitarian principle, Gloria?
What do you mean by the utilitarian principle?
That when you have to take decisions, you have to balance costs and benefits. Yeah.
Well, I would be a little bit more Machiavellian than you guys. No, not Machiavellian, but for example, the lockdown, as far as I know, back home in Guatemala is until March 30. That's what they originally said. I don't know if they're gonna, put it back for more time during April. I have no idea. But what I would do is profit from the fact that everybody is back home and that they're in this lockdown. And I would do what Yaron Brook wants to do in the United States. I would constitutionally separate once and for all economics from government. So what I would do is, from here until March 30, while people are home, I would do the major deregulations that would never be taken, that people would oppose towards a freer market. So when everybody comes out of the lockdown, you are dealing with a new economy, not the same crony, corrupted, mercantilist paternalistic economy that you just can build and build more with, you know.
And since we talk about Latin America, Naomi Klein had this massive hit, that book, The Shock Doctrine, and she said, we're going to have shocking deregulation. Capitalism is going to take advantage of a crisis to deregulate everything. And what we see is that statism is taking advantage of a massive catastrophe to impose like the most anti-liberal measures that we've seen in history. In recent history. Okay, have we got any other question that we've probably missed, or someone wants to throw something on the table? And if the answer is no, and unless I've missed someone who should speak now or remain silent for the rest of the webinar, shall we give the last? So what would be the parting words that Jonathan and Gloria would want us to leave this webinar? What are the thoughts you want us to retain after this?
Well, the things that I would like to, you know, put out there is, I think this is an amazing opportunity to communicate why liberty works. I think that we should look back to other crises, what happened in Chernobyl, what happened in 2008, what happened in 1929, and learn lessons of why during those crises we were not effective enough as to, you know, communicate that statism doesn't work, and see what can we do different now in this coronavirus crisis. One of the things that I think we can do now, and it's an advantage versus all of those, is that this is a world crisis. I think that the last time the whole world had one enemy was maybe World War II with Adolf Hitler. But I cannot recall any other time in human history where the entire world had one menace in common as the coronaviruses. And I think that that's an amazing opportunity to come and make our points across. We need to communicate this. We need to do that counter battle for our own self-interest. If you are selfish enough to live in a world that is more capitalist, staying quiet and out of the discussion is not going to make it. Because the other side is doing a massive effort in order for coming up after this crisis with more government expenditures. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Well, I'll briefly, just on this notion of markets is kind of a little bit more of my alley. I think hopefully use this opportunity, as Gloria said, to emphasize the notion of why bailouts and interventions are destructive, that it's not a help, that the whole point of a market system is to reflect reality, and that all the interventions make markets slower to respond, slower to recover, and are wealth destroying, I think, in the short term and the long term. And maybe hopefully walk people off the plank in terms of the fear about job loss and bankruptcy, and, you know, remind them of the resilience of capitalism, and I'd say the American spirit, but capitalism wherever it is and all over the world, and how any values that we're going to have now or in the future can only be produced by free-thinking men and women. So that's what we need now more than ever.
Thanks. And for the closing remarks to Razi.
Yeah, so first, thanks again, everybody, for joining us. And a massive thanks to Jonathan and Gloria for giving us a clearer and more optimistic view of the situation. And yeah, as I said at the beginning, we'll be doing this 3 times a week now. We're all stuck at home, so this is the best thing to do. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. This Saturday, we'll be discussing psychology with Josh Dixon, and starting this Saturday, that'll be every Saturday. And yeah, pretty soon, at some point, I don't know how soon, but at some point we will launch our weekly panel discussions, and we will have speakers from all over the UK and all over the world, hopefully Jonathan and Gloria as well. And yeah, ideas are not going to stop mattering when there's no global pandemic. They matter always. So I hope you will join us for our Zoom meetups for now and our live events hopefully soon. Thanks.